Welcome to the Mundane and the Arcane. This is a session with Jared and Matt. Due to some illnesses and a surgery within the party, we weren't able to get a session out for this release. So Matt and I have been talking about doing something in particular for special content, and we wanted to kind of throw it out there into the world and see what the response is. See if you guys like it. See if you want to see more of this. And if so, I think this is something that either we can put up on Patreon or we can put up on, whatever it is. YouTube.
Extra content.
Yeah, just YouTube. Some extra content somewhere that lives within the world. So
yeah,
kind of to give an idea of what the idea is. Matt, how long have you been DMing?
As of this year, 15 years.
Okay, so 15 years, and that obviously goes back to multiple versions of D&D.
Pathfinder 3.5, technically 3.0. I never ran a 2. Or a second edition game. Obviously, 5th edition, 4th edition as well. So, yeah, I put on a few hats over the years, I guess.
Okay, and that's primarily what you do. You don't typically play as a player. Not because you don't want to, just because you get designated as the DM, right?
I do get put in that situation a lot. When I first tried, I guess, DMing, it was, I'd see my friends do it, and I'd think like, oh, well, this is a really cool idea or story that I want to tell, maybe with a few changes on how the game is played or what we focus on so much. And then went off to college. Nobody knew how to play, but they all wanted to. And then moving to Austin and then here to Houston, it's the same thing. A lot of people want to play D&D, but not a lot of people have the experience or know somebody who's comfortable in the role. So I would usually get asked to do it.
Okay, and that's kind of where I am as a DM. I have DM'd literally a one-shot, one time. It was one session for maybe about an hour and a half at most. And I don't think I did particularly well.
Okay. I think a lot of DMs feel that way, but
yeah,
starting out.
I think it's mostly because I tried to get cute with it, and I tried to introduce this character that was supposed to be the big bad at the end of the session, and he was a merchant, and he sold the party like all these wrong spells, and he was trying to sell them like bad magical weapons, stuff that was going to screw them over later on.
Truly nefarious for a big bad evil guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And eventually what ended up happening, like he sold a couple 9-level spells.
Okay.
And there was a complete party wipe. So, I think I had a good idea. I don't think I was very good at implementing said idea. So I think that's kind of where this whole session came from is, I have questions for you. You have the knowledge to give to others who are aspiring DMs. I
hope so.
Yeah, I think that's primarily who this would be for, is people who love D&D, want to play more D&D, want to DM and tell their own creative stories, because, what's better than having a group of your friends come in and say, oh man, that was such a great session.
Oh, yeah. And you'll get those times where I'll have a party super invested in an NPC that I just randomly named one session. He had a halberd.
Oh, hold on. Wait, you mean like Darren?
Exactly. I had Harold the Halberdier. Their first session, this NPC, town guard, managed to crit and, kill 5 or 6 goblins while the whole party only killed, 2. And so when they got tasked with being, local adventurers that might be willing to help out the town, they basically went we want that guy to come with us. And he stuck with them off and on all the way from level 1 to level 10. And then big dragon attack, bunch of armies attacking the city. And during the fight, Harold, they just see me cross out Harold's hit point bar, his hit point tally, and they just screamed at me, no! And I was there's just this magic in tabletops of, I don't know, these stories, you become so invested, and those memories stick with me. I mean, that campaign was 5 years ago. They still talk about, like, my party still talks about it.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, and that's what's great about D&D.
Yeah.
In tabletop specifically.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, no, I mean, that sensation's great. I'm really, I love that you want to DM and, like, have that aspiration to do so.
yeah, and the thing that makes me want to DM is I love telling a narrative story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that I would be the DM that is going to stick to the rules mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously the rules are there. You have to follow the rules to some degree, but I think I would want to tell a good story and have people like just have some emotions, and leave the session saying that was such a great thing. I didn't expect it to go this way. How you did this was great.
Right.
And I mean, I guess that's kind of narcissistic to some degree.
I think it's when you have, like, a lot of creative energy and you want an outlet for it because you're passionate about it. DMing is a fantastic way to do that.
Yeah. And I think that, being able to tell a narrative story, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can take stuff and give it this little twist that people didn't really expect, but it fits with the story.
Mm-hmm.
Where I don't get DMing and where I want to understand how to DM is setting up the world, setting up the big bad, setting up the small little encounters that you're going to meet, from time to time, and know exactly what situation to put the players in, depending on what level they are.
Right. And a lot of that's just trial and error experience. The more you do it, the better you get a feel for it. And I mean, yeah, sometimes the party goes off and they're like, oh, we want to go, like, I don't know, go explore a cave that you mentioned one time, like 5 sessions ago. And you're like, okay. You have to immediately start populating that cave on the fly. And
like with Darren.
Yeah, with Darren. It's just a cave full of Darrens. But yeah, that just comes with a little bit of improv experience, but you gain that as you DM if you don't want to go take classes or anything. And yeah, just it comes with doing it. I did want to say, though, I mean, I think for you especially, and you mentioned it, that people who are wanting to DM or aspiring to but just don't know how to get their feet wet or anything like that, I think these kinds of shows, DM tips, I know Mercer's got one on YouTube, and then there's a bunch of YouTube channels, and they do talk about this, but I'm fascinated by them, and then I think I grow as a better DM just by also getting into that side of it, not necessarily at the table, but learning how other people play their tables.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. We do have a topic that we wanted to talk about tonight, and that is specifically session zeros.
Yes. To establish what a session zero is, it's loosely defined as kind of I wouldn't say a non-canon episode, but it's usually the first time that the players are dipping into their characters, and it's depending on how you want to do it, it can either be about establishing what kind of game you're going to play with your entire group, and that's when you can establish rules like cell phones at the table. Do you guys want high fantasy, low fantasy, things like that? I tend to do that outside of a session zero, just through conversation, and usually people have a pretty good sense of it. But if it's all new players, a bunch of strangers if you're playing at like a hobby shop, and then those session zeros are actually really important to kind of establish what y'all are all doing.
Yeah, and it kind of gets you familiar with everybody else at the table, especially if you're like you said, playing at a shop and you don't know anybody else, and you just kind of stumbled into a game, and then you're like, okay, well, I don't know how these players play. Like you could, we know somebody in particular that is very aggressive to other players. And you never know when you're going to run into one of those at a shop. And when you do, I can imagine it is extremely frustrating. So I think that kind of gives you a sense, to begin with, like how this player is going to play their character and who they are. And I think you can usually tell kind of who they are by the characters they're creating.
A lot of times, yes.
Yeah.
If they're creating, I would say a lot of times people, if they're fairly new to the game, they either want to play like a super generic like concept, or they want to go wacky and zany and be like the Kramer of the party and jump on in.
Oh, you mean like me? Now you're calling me out specifically.
But yeah, that's one way to run a session 0. My personal preference is to have kind of mini one-offs with each character to dive into the stories that they've created for their characters. And that can work for newer players that aren't as comfortable with role-playing or anything. It gives them a concept of what is this game, and like without the pressure of other people watching or judging them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty good way to go about it. It's my preferred way. And then go ahead.
Let's talk about a little bit how we did it for our current campaign.
Okay.
We did specifically you as the DM sitting down with one player and doing their backstory.
Yes.
And for a podcast, that works amazingly well.
I would agree, yeah.
Because not only is it a little bit of content and a little bit of context for who the character is and kind of their backstory, so you can explain that and give the exposition without doing it within the campaign.
Right.
And that way listeners can be like, oh, this is kind of where this character is coming from, and this is where they're headed, and they have a little bit more, like, again, context as to what you're trying to do with the character. But within a party that is not a podcast.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's how most people are going to be playing it, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that, me personally, I would think that kind of would be a good thing to do outside of a podcast as well, just because it lets the player get invested.
Yes.
As much as possible before they start playing that character, like, for real.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. That's why, if I can, I always do a session 0. Sometimes scheduling doesn't allow for it. Some of my home games have turned out that way, but if I do have the opportunity, I love to build these characters up. Plus, I get to explore the character more. And so, let's say Nathan's character, Deacon, he, we go into kind of like his backstory about his traveling troupe got like burned to the ground, and he's been traveling with his dad for like 5-10 years, and you understand his motivations about why he does what he does. But I can start kind of dropping little beats for him to follow for his own development as his character.
So does it help you at all as the DM to play the characters of like the families and the friends of these characters, so that you have kind of an idea? Because a lot of times they'll come up sometime in the campaign. Does it help you at all to like have that pre-rolled already and be like, hey, all I have to do is pull up this character. I've already got a character voice for him.
I really like it. Actually, the podcast has been amazing for me to go back and listen to and be like, what did that character sound like? I know it was like kind of like this, but I want to make sure I get it. And then I also I don't know. I think I missed part of the first part, and I had an answer, and then I jumped to a second part. What was the first part, though? So
if you as a DM, does it help you?
Right. That's what it was.
Yeah.
That also requires trust. You have to trust, because your characters are invested in these NPCs, whether it be family or lovers or friends or a pet or anything. The player has, if they are willing to trust the DM with that character and let them play in that space, then I find it to probably be the most rewarding way to play. I loved playing y'all's characters, y'all's families.
I absolutely love Gronk Session Zero.
I enjoyed all of them, but yeah, Gronk's was great. Like, because you had so many people in your
Right.
family to interact with, and so I was, trying to come up with like 4 different personalities on how they would react to like whatever you were doing. And
Right. Because,
yeah.
I mean, 2 sisters, a mom and a dad, and then you threw a wild card in there with a best friend that I was not expecting at all. So, to have that, and now every session we have, it's in the back of my mind, like, what's going to go on? Like, where is my character going to go and meet back up with, family and the best friend that you introduced that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, no, and that was another, like I was talking about earlier, just dropping a little that story thread that later we can both explore in ways that you don't know yet.
Yeah, it's a cool little nugget that you can use, or maybe you just don't use it. Maybe it just doesn't come up, but it gives you that option.
Yes, I do encourage people to have some form of connection. They're not just a lone wolf wandering for no real reason, because you're not going to care about a character who doesn't care about anything else.
Yeah,
so.
I mean that's a very simple character to create.
Yeah,
and I think that a lot of new players will create those kind of characters. I know I did. My first character, everybody hated because he was legitimately an asshole, and I built him specifically because he was an asshole.
Yeah.
And like, he was a druid, an elf druid, and he lived in the forest where there was nobody. He just hung out with animals.
Yeah.
So he had no people skills. So he was just an asshole because he was very self-involved. And that was my first character I ever created. And I know that everybody hated him. And to some degree, I hate him too. But I mean, I would still like to explore that character. Being a little bit more seasoned as a player, I would still like to see what I could bring out in Ray.
Yeah.
And see if there's something there.
Yeah, a lot of times people do want to bring in characters they didn't feel like they got to explore fully. But yeah, the kind of running the NPCs, if the player doesn't trust the DM, or maybe if the DM themselves don't trust their ability to dive into those aspects, I would say you can give license to the player to kind of be like, oh, well, my dad and my mom would think this, or my sister would think this, and they kind of just exist more as background pieces and like props.
Yeah. But I think that kind of hinders the story a bit.
It can, and I think it comes with experience. And then also, what do you want out of the game? Some people do want to just show up and beat stuff up. But I think our audiences hopefully probably think more in line like we do, and we want to explore those.
Yeah, we want to explore all the lines that are possible.
Yeah.
And tell a narrative story and get people invested in the story itself, and not just, oh, hey, it's cool, they went and they fought a dragon and they beat it. And
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, not to, hate on people that do like that stuff.
No, because in all honesty, I mean, combat is fun as shit.
Yeah. And
I love combat, but as a player, I also love the little small things that the DM puts in there that just surprises you and takes the story into a new category. And you're like, wow, that's really fucking cool.
Yeah. Like, I love it when people are like, oh man, like I was tearing up at my own story and about like how I was interacting with this character you just threw out at me out of nowhere. And I'm just like, I'm so glad you felt that too. Like, I felt the gravity of the situation. I hope it was bouncing off and that we had that same energy. And I do think the one-on-one style session zeros really do help bring that out.
And specifically, how do you feel like 5th edition has helped in storytelling?
I would say they streamlined a lot of rules. It's much more user-friendly and new player-friendly. They combined several concepts that kind of makes sense. Like there's just a stealth roll now, and before it was hide, sneak, move silent, and those were 3 different stats, and you had to kind of adjust to like, okay, I have a +4 to this, but I have a situational bonus of +5, but this one I only have a +2 in, and I get no bonuses, or it got a little crunchy. I loved it when I was super into it, and then I took a little bit of a hiatus, and when I came back, I had 4th edition for a little bit. That one was very loose in the rules, like were very minimalistic rather, and some people love it because because there were so few rules, they could tell stories more rather than focus on their 3 abilities. But 5th edition, I think, when they incorporated the backgrounds and let those influence like your skill choices and your proficiencies, that really helped. Like also set up like gives you a hint on kind of where your character, how did they live their life, and so it gives you a starting point, and that's just built into the book. You don't have to use them; you can make up your own, which I've done a couple times. But that's a great starting point, I think, and then just not having so many rules that kind of crunch, and it also gives the DM a lot of, like, it's built into the book, and they basically imply or even directly tell you sometimes if the rule isn't like clearly defined, you defer to the DM and you move on, and you don't get. I mean, I've been at tables where they argue about a rule for like 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah,
and it's honestly the worst. Like
those are never fun.
Yeah,
because they usually get heated.
Yes. And it becomes a very, you're right, I'm wrong, and I don't like that feeling at the table.
Yeah.
And I think 5th edition definitely encourages a lot of whatever choices you are making, they're probably right. So it really helps you grow with your character.
Yeah. So getting back to session 0 type stuff, you can have obviously the player and DM.
Mm-hmm.
Session 0. You can also have just the typical party session 0, where you're introducing the campaign and the world to players who are coming into this universe, and kind of explain the process of doing like a whole party session 0.
Okay. I find these to be best for if you have a lot of new players that don't grasp the rules, they've never done a tabletop, or they haven't played D&D specifically. You can you can set them up to be like, hey, you guys all either know each other or you're all in the same location. I've used one where they were heading to a town to like go to a big festival, I think, because the trade routes had just reopened after like 2 decades. And so everybody was excited to be like, hey, what's been going on in this area? Like nobody's seen this in a long time. So they're on a boat traveling there. They don't really know each other. Like I give them a few moments of like, yeah, there's the captain, there's the other people, at the table, and like, I don't know, there's like a couple and their kid. And then all of a sudden the boat gets attacked, and you just jump right into like, you don't have to go into like, well, you didn't know about the great country of Abgadamilaba, and let me tell you about all their social conflicts. Can
you spell that for everybody real quick?
Yes, it is SORRY, because I'm sorry that came out of my mouth. But yeah, you don't kind of overload them with a lot of lore and information, because especially if they're new players, they just created a character for the first time. And I've said for many, many years, character creation is probably the worst part of D&D when you don't know how to do it. It usually takes hours. And so when they can just kind of be like, oh, I just did all this math and crunched all these numbers, and I don't know what armor class means. I have hit points. I kind of know that's how healthy I am, I think. I don't know what it means to be an elf compared to being an orc or a human. And you can just kind of start to, once you just let them use all that math they just did immediately, it helps sink in how the game works.
Yeah. And I think that it kind of relates to, I mean, if you're listening to this specifically right now, you've probably listened to our first session, and it seems like there's a lot of those elements that you put into our first session. Not necessarily because me, Nathan, and Stacy are, completely new to D&D, because we're not, but we're new to the world as it pertains to the party.
Yes.
So it's us coming into this city, Tristalin, and learning what's going on and figuring it all out and figuring out like who we are as a party and how we know each other and, what is that inciting incident that brings us together.
Yes. And I think those, like, you could say our first session was kind of like a session 0, but it was the first time you were all doing it together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I like using, give a little bit of a spectacle. What do they see? How do they, what's the weather like? What are the people like? What's the attitude of the area around them? And then jump in with something that basically forces the party to have to interact. And then from there on, it's more up to the players now that they're like, oh, like we just survived a bandit attack or an orc attack or whatever. And they'll be like, so do you want to go grab a beer? We're war buddies now almost. And then they can start delving into like their actual histories, like, are these people going to be friends? Do they have similar motives, etc.? And I find that to be a good launching point.
Okay, and that's pretty good. I think that's going to end it for us for this session. Matt, I think this went really well.
I enjoyed it.
I learned some stuff, definitely, and I look forward to learning a lot more.
Hope to be here with you.
So thank you, everybody, for listening. Definitely get at us on all of our social media at TMaTAcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us. Please email us some questions for Matt or even myself. For somebody who has never really DM'd before, send us some questions and we will answer them on the show.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And we are Killer Fun. We explore the intersection of crime and entertainment every other week.
For as long as people have been communicating, they have been talking about who did what to whom, and is that socially acceptable?
Because the boundaries of society,
crime,
and entertainment have always gone hand in hand.
The more salacious,
or weird,
the better. From books and movies
to television shows and games,
we look at how life and art imitate and inform one another.
And we can't get together and not laugh. So let's face it, there's going to be laughing.
Killer Fun is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, so join us.
Forge Audio.
Dream it.
Build it.
Share it.